health fields or other fields is clinically based. It's occurring out in the trenches. It's not occurring primarily in a university setting. And one of the criticisms that's been leveled towards teacher education over the years is the abyss between theory and practice, that university is too theoretically based and too abstract, and districts that sometimes might be too parochial and just dealing with what's happening tomorrow. And an internship is an effort to try and blend the two and have universities involved in an internship program, but really have it be field-based. We have had internship programs in California for a long, long time, but it's only been in the last few years, particularly with class size reduction, that there has been a strong state support for these programs and more interest, I think, both by universities and school districts to pursue the internship option. One other great advantage of internship programs is it provides a vehicle for reentry professionals, for people who are making mid-career changes. It makes it a more attractive option because in a traditional program, someone has to go back and spend a couple of years in school, pay tuition, not have a source of income, and many people cannot afford to do that with family responsibilities. The internship provides a means, a bridge for reentry professionals to be able to support their families while at the same time be in training. The other, I think, very positive development and encouraging development in pre-service education is kind of a consensus, I think, that's emerged in the last few years among professionals that's now been translated both through work by the California Teaching Credentialing Commission, as well as the legislature and the recently passed Alpert legislation, Senator Alpert's legislation, that is encouraging teacher education to occur during the undergraduate years. California has had a tradition of going back 30-plus years to not focusing on teacher education until one receives a baccalaureate degree, and then in a very short period of time, an intense period in the traditional program in the 5th year of learning all about what it means to be a teacher, and half of that is in a student teaching position. And particularly today with the high stakes that's involved in education, if you don't have a good education, you're not going to be able to really make it in our society. And given the high emphasis that's now placed on standards and having all students achieve at a certain level, a lot more is asked of classroom teachers. And we really need to begin the process sooner and have more intensive work. If there's one thing that I've seen in the couple of years that was taking a look at teacher training programs here in California is the complaint by almost everyone that was involved is that there just isn't sufficient time. You can take a subject, for example, like reading, that is very complex to teach and extremely important, and the amount of time that was devoted to reading instruction in a teacher preparation program was clearly inadequate. But given the time constraints in the law, it was difficult to do what we wanted to do in reading in some of the other areas. So moving earlier in the process, I think, is a very healthy development. If I could express concerns about pre-service training, there would be a couple. The first is that I still don't think that universities or school districts pay as much attention to this as they should. There's a lot of lip service to it. I think within the leadership of universities, that is with presidents and deans and whatnot, there is more sensitivity to issues having to do with teacher preparation because there is political pressure along those lines. But within the sort of more general academic community, the training of teachers is still viewed, I think, as sort of a lower status option for people within the university. It does not have the kind of professional or academic recognition that it deserves given society's needs. And likewise, I would say for school districts, the training of teachers is not something that they view as a major responsibility of their own. It's someone else's responsibility, someone else's fault, and I think if we're really going to significantly address this issue, it has to be a higher priority both for universities and for school districts. The other concern I have about teacher preparation programs is that I think we need to be doing a much better job of linking these programs to the standards movement and seeing that teacher preparation programs are focused much more on assessment and on effective practices and what sort of responses do we have when things do not go well. And I don't think that our preparation programs are really as attuned to those kinds of concerns as they need to be. The second area of teacher training, the induction, the first and second year period, is the area where I think we have a lot to be particularly grateful for and proud of here in California because of the development of the BITSA program, Beginning Teacher Support and Assessment Program, a program that's been around now for a few years. It's highly successful, but in the last 2 or 3 years has taken off in terms of funding level. And with the recent action by the governor and the legislature, we're at the point where in the not too distant future, we hope that every beginning teacher will have what every beginning teacher should have had for a long time, which is a mentor, a process by which a beginning teacher will have both emotional and professional support in this very challenging career that they're undertaking. When you have a good support program for beginning teachers, attrition rates go down, the ability of people to be an effective classroom teacher from day one or year one, rather than having to wait for 5 years to learn it all, increases dramatically. So the induction program is, I think, the thing that California right now is really at the cutting edge of. I think our major concern with it is that it's going to be expanding so rapidly as to whether or not the initial years of the BITSA program that were high quality, whether or not those will be able to be maintained as we scale up so dramatically. The last area that I wanted to talk about is the professional development, or the in-service. Here the state has been providing some resources in the last couple of years that's quite different than prior to this period. For the most part, professional development prior to a couple of years ago was almost exclusively a local responsibility, but in the last couple of years, with the attention, as Diane mentioned, to the reading initiative, for example, as well as the math area, we have had substantial appropriations of state dollars for professional development for classroom teachers. Now, it has been earmarked for a particular subject matter field, such as reading and math, but that's quite different than what we've ever had before. So we've had, if you add up these resources, well over $100 million that's been devoted for professional development activities for our classroom teachers. At the same time as we've done that, the legislature is also trying to expand the instructional day and have more days that students are exposed to instruction, and there's been some trade-offs in terms of other professional development opportunities that have existed in state law, and we may see some diminishment of overall professional development as it relates to pressure from the legislature to extend the school year to 180 days. I think that one of the great challenges in all of our efforts to be of assistance to practicing classroom teachers is to try and move our professional development activities to be clinically based, to relate to the work of the classroom teacher. The way that professional development usually is operated is a series of workshops, a series of consultants come in, give very nice presentations, but the link between that nice presentation and what the classroom teacher does when he or she goes back and has to operationalize some of the new concepts that have been presented, get some kind of feedback, make some kind of adjustments, be part of some kind of a critical conversation, that for the most part just does not exist. And it doesn't exist in part because it can be very expensive to do that, to have a mechanism in place by which you can have that kind of monitoring and feedback and have time during the school day to do that. And that's one of the real beauties of the induction program, the BITSA program, is because it is clinically based. It is based upon 2 or more individuals working together and taking a look at what's happening in someone's classroom, having an opportunity for some reflection on what's occurring, and then offering some advice and suggestions on how things can be modified. If we are truly serious about acting on this belief that if we really want students to meet the standards, we have to improve teacher quality, then I think moving to this more field-based, clinically based professional development and teacher education model is what has to occur here in California. I also finally would just want to say a word about teacher recruitment, because almost all the studies that we have indicate that in addition to the training and preparation that people receive, the quality of people who want to pursue a teaching career is extremely important in terms of their intellectual skills, in terms of their motivation and their willingness to make a contribution. And too often in the past, in part because I think of California's, the way we have credentialed teachers, oftentimes people enter teaching by default. that if they don't want to go into some other professional field, teaching becomes kind of a profession of last resort. And that, of course, is very much related to how we compensate teachers in California, as well as what working conditions are for California teachers. The working conditions we're beginning to seriously address through class size reduction, but the issue of compensation is still a very serious matter. A beginning teacher in most school districts earns less than $30,000. For the amount of professional preparation that's involved, that's an inadequate competitive salary. So as we talk about ways to try and strengthen our teacher training and teacher professional development activities, at the same time I think we have to be taking a look at recruitment issues. And that's why I believe that the matter that I spoke of earlier about starting teacher education programs earlier in the undergraduate years is one mechanism by which we can begin that recruitment process. But I think it has to be linked to dollars and the salary schedule that we try to provide for classroom teachers.
Gary, you're an expert at getting your remarks together in 10 minutes. You're perfect. Obviously very experienced at this. And providing me with a good segue in what Gary was talking about in terms of pre-service to in-service. I think, moving on to our next speaker, Dr. Alice Furry, what her work represents is that important transition. As a pre-service provider, we had, by legislation, to gear up over the past year or so to enhance and improve how we teach our teachers to teach reading. And we had to make some very fundamental changes to all of our course outlines and to prepare our students to pass the new state exam known as the RECA. So our pre-service teachers will be prepared to teach reading better than they were before. But then the question still prevails as to what about all of the teachers that are already in the classroom and what happens with them. And so I think the work of Dr. Alice Furry will address those issues and those concerns. So I'd like to turn the microphone to Alice.
Thank you very much, Diane. Unfortunately, my focus on my comments to begin with are not as closely in alignment with what both Gary and Diane have said, because I'm looking for a solution of what I see as a major crisis in the quality of teachers. And so I would like just to sort of propose a sense of community and where the responsibility should be for improving the quality of our teachers. And then perhaps during the question and answer, because I would love to comment on the concerns both on pre-service induction and staff development because of efforts that we are engaged in. But I'd like to begin by saying, first of all, that I think probably everyone here thinks of themselves as a member of community. And I think the theme of this conference is focused on community. And I'd like to define that for myself as a speaker here, that I feel that I am a member of a community of universities in my region, school districts, school boards, and parents. And I want to really underline parents. If there's one thing about a public school system and preparing teachers to serve in a public school system, I think the new awareness that we all have is that we are here to serve the parents and their children. And all the focus should be forcing all of us in the community to have a sense of responsibility for the results of the learning that occurs in our classrooms. So my answer to the question, how are we teaching our teachers? I think it is problematic. I think we need to greatly improve. I think there is a definite sense of urgency. And I believe that the community that I represent here today sees it as a major priority. So I'm going to take issue with Gary on whether or not school districts, school boards, and universities haven't been alert enough to see that this is at the crisis level. I'm saying that we feel this way and that we are the majority because we are aware that the majority of our students are not performing on grade level. We do have a sense now of knowledge and professional growth in knowing from the research that we do know how to teach, particularly in the area of reading. And I think we believe that what teachers teach is what students learn. So I'm certain that there are some of you that feel we need more money, we need more resources, we need more time. But what I think that we really need is a shared sense of responsibility across the community. It is not one institution, one agency, and I really do think that it may not necessarily be a solution that will occur statewide, but the local regional community certainly has first chance to making a change, and I do think that the body politic in the state has gone a long way to help us in this effort, and I'll make reference to that in the end. The three concepts that I'd like to share today address really two sectors. The first one is the university as a whole. I think the universities need to be much more flexible in the way they're going to begin to structure their courses, design their programs, and staff their programs. And I think that they should hold themselves accountable to the extent to which they are preparing their teachers both in content, and I'm not talking about pedagogy. I'm talking about the basic knowledge that our teachers must have, and the system, once they get out in the schools, have at least the ability to help them. I'm talking about math professors. I'm talking about the colleges of liberal arts and sciences. We have to be sure that we gain their attention and have them realize that when they are designing their courses for their undergraduates, that we want to see that a high proportion of those students would be competent enough to share that knowledge and be prepared well enough to teach in our schools, be it elementary, middle, or high school. The second thing is, when we look to our professional schools of education, I'm very concerned that they aren't using their natural resource, and their natural resource are the teachers they have prepared. To what extent they know how successful teacher by teacher has been in the classroom. Perhaps not just the first year, but multiple years. And what are those successes and what are those disappointments? Because in order for us to all move with the times and understand the populations we're serving and the extent to which our knowledge base is or is not available in the classroom, I would like to see them follow up and move to change. This is difficult to do, to change the design, the content, and the delivery of these teachers to our schools. Thirdly, I think districts need to work as diligently as possible, and I believe, at least in my region, they are moving almost as leaders in this, in a coordinated way with the university. The example that Gary gave on the internship program, I really see the internship program is something we really want to see expanded. And it's not just because of the attraction of giving paid salaries and on-the-job training. I think what it is that it gives the most experienced teachers, the most experienced administrators opportunities to directly give on-the-job training. And one thing that is totally missing in my observation at the university and in the professional schools is direct training on the very instructional programs that the local boards and their district staffs and their schools have adopted. In fact, you would probably not find a single course that really is matching where that practicing teacher is or where they may probably get their employment in their local community, having anything to say about the instructional programs that have been adopted and implemented in the district. So there's a terrific disjointed or non-connected experience that is not occurring at the university, can only occur at the school district level. I want to acknowledge the fact, though, that San Francisco State and Sacramento State University are both engaged in internship programs in my community, Sacramento area. San Francisco State with Elk Grove and San Francisco CSUS Sacramento, excuse me, my local one, with Sac City, in which they are partnering with the very finest instructors, or faculty members, administrators of those districts in teaching the content and the implementation of the instructional programs. You have a deputy superintendent teaching one of the courses, you have the director of standards, curriculum, and instruction in another, and you even have county people assisting in that instruction. So I find that very positive. There's a lot at stake, and here's the difference from my perception of what's changing in these internships. The stakes are very high for a district. They've already paid the salary of that teacher for the first year. They're going to be paying for the salary the second year. If that teacher doesn't wash, either both in taking the state tests or is effective in that classroom, that's a lot of investment and time that's wasted. And we can't afford to return or to take these candidates and return them to the general public in a different employment area. As you know, 300,000 teachers in the next decade. When we know that 5% of the teachers are retiring annually, we've got a tremendous problem because, frankly, it looks like we're going to have quantity over quality. So I think the expansion of the work of districts working with the universities makes for this third point I'm trying to make, really will focus the content, will focus the staff development that goes on even in the district for those, the experienced teachers, be markedly more focused, more deliberate, and what I'm hopeful for, and which is my experience right now in this project that I'm engaged in, to do it systematically, that it's so deliberate, so focused, that it really brings the whole system into focusing on how well they're teaching, because if you don't know what every teacher at every grade is teaching from, and you have variations in the student success with the program, how in the world do you know what you should change? So with that in mind, and knowing too that I would suggest that districts partner with universities in which we reverse the internships, where we have the master principal, we have the master teachers serving as in-resident faculty to bring about in the other programs other than internships, where we have that real practice and the real connect between what the instructional programs are. But again, I must emphasize the fact that I'm really more concerned about the competency of the teacher in the content area, and I'm talking elementary as well as middle and high school. If they aren't competent, I don't know that we have any resources, both in the professional schools of education or in the districts, to shore that up. They're going to have to do it on their own, and we can't cover all the territory. What we can cover is preparing them to teach the instructional program that the local board has adopted. So I think that these are the questions I would want the community to be raising, and they're very, very serious questions. First, is it okay that the community, that your children's success is dependent upon the differential ability of his or her teacher that the system randomly assigns to his or your child's classroom? B, is it okay that the community, when we disaggregate the data, and there are differences in achievement levels across different populations that more reflect our, frankly, more reflect our ability to teach than the abilities of the students we are to teach? Thirdly, is it okay that the community, is it okay with the community that students who begin to fail in our system, for whatever reason, continue to fail, and many of them drop out? Is it okay that the educational leadership, and I'll focus on leadership, explain the causes for this simply as things they do not have any control over? And finally, is it okay with the community that California's education system is where it is? Of course, we are all here because we do care, but I would venture to say that there are some here, maybe even in this room, who are upset with what the body politic of the state has done. They have set up the RECA, which Diana mentioned. This is the Reading Instruction Competency Assessment. All teachers now, as of October '98, must pass a very comprehensive assessment on their ability to teach reading from this is K-8 and have the knowledge behind what it means to teach reading. Also, of course, there's been all kinds of discussion about CBEST, and I got to end here, about the implementing of standards that were authorized solely by the state board by law, and about the SAT-9, and soon to come, the augmented SAT-9 for the standards assessment, that this is not fair, that this is not a real test of what our teachers are teaching and what our students are learning. But I would propose that the community must respond, that it needs to ask these serious questions, and that the system has got to move fast. We cannot allow, frankly, I would claim we have at least a generation of very, very weak readers in this state. Very, very weak readers. So I would conclude that I really am quite impressed with the work that the federal government has done too, which supports this effort that we're discussing today. They made a statement in their 97 or 96 release of What Matters Most, Teaching for America's Future. They concluded by saying, we propose an audacious goal. By the year 2006, America will provide all students with what should be their educational birthright, access to competent, caring, and qualified teachers. We know that it is our teachers that are going to make a difference in this state. So we have to really seriously invest community support that we do the best we can in preparing them.
Thank you, Alice. Thank you very much for your provocative statements. I think that was certainly energizing to all of us. I'm going to introduce Kim Rubin to speak next. And as I was reading to you her resume and her background, I thought that she perhaps would be talking to you about finance issues and financing education. And she says, well, actually, I've been working in another area and gathering some data that I thought might be of interest to the audience. And so I'm going to let Kim talk to you about her latest research and some of the data that she's collected, which I think will be very interesting.
Okay, well, I will start by explaining how, besides the fact that maybe I am a segue from the rest of the conference into this room, you might wonder why I have anything to say about how we're teaching our teachers. Well, I come about this from a sort of different discipline. I started out interested in how tax limits in general, and Proposition 13 in particular, affected the services that state and local governments were providing. And the basic service that we think about is education. And basically there's been some work done that's shown that tax limits, or states that have passed tax limits, have actually shown declines in student achievement over time. So I'm doing some work with David Figlio, who's a professor at the University of Florida, where we were trying to figure out how this works. And what we were trying to figure out is whether it could be that there's a decline in the level of achievement of the people who decide to become teachers. So we were looking at whether the underlying quality of people who become teachers has changed after the passage of these limits. And so what I'm going to do here today is talk a little bit about that research, and then talk about some work I've just started doing, which looks at basically the qualities that the national study that Alice was just talking about thought were important in what makes effective teachers. And so what I'm going to do first is talk about this work I've done with David Figlio, and then I'm going to segue into looking at how California teachers compare to other teachers within the nation about meeting some of these qualifications that have been set up in the study on what matters most. So basically, first what I find with David is when we look at different states over time, so we're looking at who became teachers in the 1970s as compared to who became teachers in the 1990s, we find that the underlying skill of the people who went into teaching has actually declined in tax limit states as compared to those states that didn't pass these limits. Part of this has to do with the fact that you could see passage of a tax limit as basically a frontal assault on public services. Basically, voters are saying we don't care about these things, and there actually could be an incentive effect where there's actually fear that there wouldn't be jobs available. And we actually do find that the underlying skill, as measured by test scores of when students are in high school themselves, has declined when we look at education majors versus non-majors in tax limit states versus non-tax limit states. The caveat I have to add right here is that this result doesn't seem to hold as strongly for California. Something does seem to be happening differently here. Part of that could have to do with the fact that teacher salaries haven't declined as much as they have in other tax limit states. But basically, what that work does is it doesn't actually get to this issue about how to teach the people who are becoming teachers. It says more about how do we actually try and get people to enter the profession in the first place, and whether we can actually increase the quality of the people entering the profession in the first place. So I'm going to just end that there as a provocative statement for the fact that there actually could have been a decline in the underlying quality of people going into the profession. Now to move on to how do California teachers compare. The first thing I want to talk about is I'm going to lay out 3 points. The first is going to be what elements create an effective teaching force. So basically, what are the things that can be done in qualifying to become a teacher that seem to have an effect on teaching? Then I'm going to look at how California's education system, so the basic body of teachers within California to date, has reached these goals, whether or not we are effective in these goals or not. And then I'm also going to focus on new teachers, whether there actually has been a decline in people who have entered the force in the last 5 years as compared to the people who were there who are older and have more experience. So the first thing is, what are the qualifications that seem to matter? And this is basically taking the findings of the National Commission on Teaching in America's Future, and they basically have a number of qualities. I'm going to basically look at the things that have to do with teacher qualifications in the first place. And they say that experience seems to matter, advanced degrees and how much education you get in the field seems to matter. Subject knowledge is critical. Whether you actually know and learn the subjects that you actually have to teach is important, and the certification and training process once you get into the classroom. So basically, are there national standards? Are teachers meeting those national standards? Do they have incentives to actually take national board tests? Are there state board tests? Is there a state certification process? And then there's also issues about mentoring and what happens when you actually enter the classroom. And so what I'm going to go through briefly is how does California compare to the other states? Well, on their report card in this report, they actually give California a 4 out of 10, which sounds pretty bad on the surface. But when you hear that only 3 states actually got more than 4 out of 10, well, maybe we're not doing such a bad job after all. And the things that they actually find as being strengths within California is the fact that there is this student teaching requirement that is longer than in many other states, the professional certification process, and the mentoring program, and the fact that there are these boards. The weaknesses in California, which in their report card they just sort of add up whether a state has one of these programs beyond a certain measure or not. So there's some problem in if you think that there actually are differences between the relative strengths or weaknesses of the different categories within the report. And the weaknesses, which I think are actually pretty substantial, are California seems to have a larger percentage of teachers who are unlicensed. So 13.2% of entering teachers in 1993 to 94 were unlicensed, basically. And they also, it's worse.
It's worse now.
Yes. And in out-of-field teaching, which I'll talk about a little bit more about the fact that we're actually having people teach classes in high schools that don't actually have a major or a minor in that field. So they're basically, mathematics is the obvious one, but California is actually below the nation in most subjects. Why don't I skip ahead? Because I'm not using my slides anyway. To look at what we're doing and where we seem to be doing poorly. Okay, I guess not. Basically, mathematics, we have 53% of teachers answer that they are teaching a class that they are not certified to teach. Of the people, oh, I have to actually find the right slide. Doesn't seem to be happening. Okay. Whatever. So basically, we're basically having people teaching in classes that don't have subject matter knowledge. Part of this has to do with the increased demand, right? Part of it is the demand for teachers in California is greatly expanding. We have more kids going into classrooms, and so actually finding people to teach these kids is a harder problem. If you look at new teachers as opposed to older teachers, we're finding that while California has about the same certification process for the existing teaching force, if you look at people who have entered teaching within the last 5 years, 12% of people who are now teaching are teaching on an emergency certificate. So basically, we're not going through the certification process that we've laid out in the way we've laid it out, basically because of this excess demand for teachers. So basically what we need to do, I think, and I'm not going to talk about the other categories, because California in other areas is actually basically on with the rest of the nation. We basically have the same number of people having advanced degrees. We're offering salaries that are a little bit higher than the rest of the nation, but that is more than compensated for by the fact that cost of living is typically higher in California than the rest of the country. And so I think the important thing to focus on is the fact that we're actually having people in the classroom who don't have the subject knowledge to teach these subjects. So it might be that what we need to do is go back in trying to encourage people to enter teaching who have these subject matter expertise. I'll stop there. Am I?
Good. Very good. As she was speaking, I wanted to jump up and go, yeah. Sometimes it's very frustrating, being the responsible person in a teacher training institution, when the headlines in the newspaper read unqualified teachers in California classrooms, and down in the middle of the paragraph it says, yeah, it's those emergency permit people, but somehow all teachers kind of get folded into that. And we have a lot of qualified teachers in California, but we also have the largest number of emergency permits, particularly in the LA basin, and with class size reduction and the baby boom 2 or tidal wave 2 increase in K-12, K-6, particularly student population, that number of emergency permit teachers has just exploded, and unfortunately exploded in a part of California where the most qualified teachers are needed most. So it's certainly an issue of concern. Last but not least, and finally, our wrap-up speaker from California School Boards Association. She asked to speak last because she says she has some very broad, global kinds of comments to make, and I'm sure that they will kind of bring this all together for us, right, Holly?
I don't know if I'll bring it all together, but I'll bring my thoughts together anyway, which is important for me. I'll feel good about it tonight. What I want to provide you with is generally a global context in which we're working right now in the state, as well as a global context in which these reforms, all these teaching reforms, are going to need to occur in order for them to be successful. We've heard a lot about the past and the current in terms of teacher shortages, in terms of teachers teaching out of their subject area, content issues, of course, and ongoing preparation challenges that school districts have in continuing with their professional development as teachers go on through the ranks. And the legislature's made some really significant and far-reaching reforms this year, which is welcomed, and Gary hit on most of those. And rather than repeat anything, I wanted to provide some of the themes that are at play, that are an interesting context for all of this discussion about teacher reforms and preparation of teachers, and the longer-term issue, of course, of how do we improve student achievement, which is, of course, the goal of this entire discussion. Right. And the first theme that's important is the state's movement toward accountability. The state legislature has made some efforts in terms of deliberation this year, although no legislation was ultimately signed into law, for holding school districts and schools accountable for student achievement. And in this context, we're talking about holding them accountable to statewide standards, and that is a different ballgame than we've been in ever before. And it's important because it's linked to standards, and accountability will also be linked to the norm reference test that Alice referenced. That increases significantly the responsibility of school districts to hire high-quality teachers who are proficient in the subject matter, highly proficient in the subject matter, and also are able to teach all levels of children, especially English language learners, and I'll talk about that briefly in a little bit. So it's not just that they have to have the content knowledge, which is essential to meet the standards, they also have to have the capacity to deliver that content knowledge of extreme rigor to all student populations. We're seeing, of course, in other states, Kentucky and Washington and Texas and Tennessee, lots of other states have instituted accountability systems, and they all fall short of, pretty much all fall short of teachers. In Kentucky, in word, it's supposed to hit teachers. The accountability is supposed to go down to the teacher level, board, superintendent, principal, and teacher. But in practice, the teacher level accountability has not been in place. And California still needs to struggle with that issue about how we will hold teachers accountable for meeting standards and for accountability overall. There's also been the second theme at play is really an expanded role in the state's involvement in education. And much of this has been since Prop 13 with funding changes. The state has been playing an unprecedented role in education on issues, whether we agree with them or not, and some of them have been very positive reforms, that have been well beyond the scope of the state in the past. And the California Reading Initiative is one example of that, where the state has gone in to talk about instructional methodologies in reading. The standards is also another area where the state has been playing an increasing role, developing content standards and fighting through the debates, and all of those of you who followed it in the newspaper, fighting through the debates about instructional strategies. How do you teach reading? How do you teach math? At what grade should math be taught? Should it be integrated? Should it not be integrated? All of those fights and battles are happening at the state level in the standards. We're also seeing it in Proposition 227, where there's a state level, not initiated by the state legislature or the state board, but by initiative, of instructional strategies for teaching English language learners, which will have a profound impact on how we prepare our teachers to teach student populations that don't speak English already, if they aren't able to deliver that instruction in the child's primary language. And that has to be a very important part of teacher preparation. And the third thing is that preparation for teachers is going well beyond universities, and Gary referenced that. BITSA is a huge professional development and training that is going beyond the universities, and then ongoing teacher preparation that learns from the areas that a teacher needs to improve upon in induction are going to become the responsibility of school districts. All of these state-level changes don't always occur with a discussion with the CTC. And a discussion with the universities about what kinds of things need to be changed in order to get teachers to the place where we need them to be. And legislation, again, this year has made some significant inroads in that, but that discussion doesn't always happen. There seems to be a disconnect between what we want kids to learn, what we're teaching teachers, and what we're testing kids on. And in the past couple of years, there's been an extreme effort to bring those pieces together. Then there are four pieces that I want to hit on that are certainly not revelations, but they're an important reminder as you talk about and raise questions about the broader policy context in which all of these reforms need to happen in order for them to be successful. A 1996 U.S. Department of Education study hit on four elements that are challenges to reform being successful. The first is curricular changes, including a lack of curriculum alignment across grade spans, a tension between presenting curriculum in a disciplinary or interdisciplinary structure, which are debates which we've had here at the state level, and implementing multiple curricular reforms at the elementary level. And there are pieces of that California is doing very well, and we've learned a lot of lessons. We've fought it out in the development of state standards and with the California Reading Initiative, trying to provide a coherent message to the field about how reading should be taught. The second is aligning the curriculum taught and the assessments used to measure students' knowledge of that curriculum. And theoretically, we're doing well on that. We have in place an assessment that will be developed someday aligned to the state standards, which hopefully, when it is ultimately developed, and I have great faith that it will be that alignment between what students are being taught and what they're being tested on. Right now, the STAR test has been a little bit of a monkey wrench into that, in that it isn't necessarily aligned with what students are being taught, and so has provided some trouble for school districts that were using other nationally norm referenced assessments that were more closely linked to the curriculum that they were teaching. The third, which is probably and is most relevant for the discussion today, is linking teacher preparation and professional development with other reform activities. And we did that very well with SB 2042 this year, aligning teacher preparation in the universities to the student standards, a novel concept, important that that happened, and the RECA assessment. I don't know how badly maligned it is, but the reading instruction competency assessment that will measure teachers' ability to teach reading. We're doing well. And finally, and this is the biggest challenge, but it has to be on the table, is creating the stable political environment necessary to nurture and maintain state reform efforts. That has been our ongoing challenge. And with the multiple bureaucracies that are working in education, the legislature, the governor, the state board, the superintendent of public instruction, the courts, the initiative process, all of those pieces at play tend to provide conflicting direction for school districts and for teachers as they try to go on and do their job. And so having that stability is essential. And term limits has obviously created a problem in terms of stability and institutional memory of what pieces are in place and what kinds of, what timetable is expected for those things to actually show improvements. And that piece of it is essential and must be in place and must be a part of the public discussion in terms of making all these reforms successful.
Thank you, Holly.
And I'm done.
Thank you to all of our panelists. I really appreciate your remarks, and now it's your turn. I'd like to open it up to the floor for questions, for comments, and my responsibility, in case it seems strange, is to repeat your questions for the videotape. Yes.
Sorry. With those of you who are sort of in the loop and understand what it's going to take in order to have quality teachers and where money needs to come from, where it needs to be placed, those of us who are not necessarily quite in that technical loop, I think that we need to have some kind of understanding the value placed on teachers, and we don't have that as a community. In many communities, they just don't see the value. They don't compare the teaching credential as like a PhD for a doctor, a lawyer, or what have you. They don't see the difference that they're placing on that. And I think as a community, especially like where I live, Stanislaus County, there's a severe dislocation of how we see things. And we want good teachers, but we're not willing to pay for it.
The comment is, how do we express the value of a teacher in terms that the community will understand, that they want and support, that we want high quality teachers, but are we willing to make the investment required in order to get them? Very good comment. Yes.
Should we go? Yeah, I think we need to comment.
Has there been any discussion in the legislature, either currently or in Senator Hart recently, about state funding specifically for teacher salaries, not locked into a categorical program, curriculum, whatever? Because I fully agree about that. We really, I feel, as a former teacher, I get no respect. I've been a teacher, a lawyer, now a local elected official. We need to professionalize teaching, and that includes compensation. And we have, obviously, we all know the respect we have for athletes versus the respect we have for teachers, et cetera. So I would like, as long as the state is holding all these years, I'd like to at least see a discussion on money for that purpose.
Well, to
The,
respond,
the question is, has there been discussions at the legislature with regard to teacher compensation? Gary?
well, the way that's translated in insiders' terms is a statewide salary schedule, where the state would take over the salary for classroom teachers, and that has been proposed on occasion, but it never even begins to see the light of day. It was interesting. The school administrators have opposed it. The teachers have opposed it, and I mean, I think on it. I think it does have, some merit, but there are these sort of internal bureaucracies within the teacher organizations and the administrator organizations that sort of run the collective bargaining process currently, who feel either because it would mean an abrogation of local control, or that some people who are experts and basically make their living off of that process, that there's not a serious entertainment of it. So sort of the education establishment is opposed to it, and then your more conservative elements who pay great lip service to local control feel that anything that would be statewide in nature would be a mistake. Let me just, both in response to your question and the previous question, make a couple of other comments. If we're talking about teacher salaries, I mean, the way that we historically have provided for it is to give more money to the local districts to use at their discretion. If there's more money, that money goes on the collective bargaining table. It usually would be translated, as we heard in the debate, the teachers union will look out for their members' interests. And Governor Wilson has felt very passionately that the teacher unions are not to be supported, not to be encouraged in any way. And so he's worked very hard when there's been money, excess money, beyond what's called just cost of living increases and growth, to capture that money some other way, and that was done primarily through class size reduction. But if you want to leave the existing mechanism and you have some resources, the way to do it is to give more discretionary money to school districts. Let me just make two other sort of comments about teachers, because I really think, and what our system is here in California and the United States, because I think there are some cultural norms that are operational here that are just sort of worth mentioning, that we're sort of locked into. I have a friend who recently spent a year in England, and had a friend in England who was in a small community, and they basically closed school down because they didn't have a licensed teacher. Their system, according to this one anecdote, is if you don't have someone who meets the minimal qualifications, you basically shut down the school, as we would probably shut down a hospital if we didn't have a licensed physician. But we have such a cultural norm now that there can be somewhere between 10 and 20% of our teachers that don't meet minimal state qualifications. And this is a particularly difficult issue in our inner cities, where the children are most in need of qualified teachers, that it is really a scandalous situation that we basically have put up with now for decades. The other point that I just would make as it relates to licensure is that it's always been galling to me that, and maybe I shouldn't say this so near to UC Davis, but think of the training that you must have to become a veterinarian in the state of California, to take care of animals, a bachelor's degree and rigorous training that some say exceeds what we have for medical school. We don't have any unlicensed veterinarians to take care of our dogs and cats and horses. But we have tens of thousands of unlicensed teachers that take care of what has to be at least as precious a resource as our animals. That points out the seriousness of the situation, and I think some of the cultural values and priorities that we place as a society upon our future generations.
Thank you. Yes, since I haven't chosen the side.
There are some alternative compensation systems, especially the work of Alan Auden, that seem to have some merit in doing the kinds of things that Kim suggested we need to do, and keeping more experienced teachers in classrooms rather than forcing them to go into administration or other non-classroom kinds of activities, and also would serve to drive teachers to increase their skill levels. And how much those alternative, some serious discussion about those alternative compensation systems, I hope would take place, as well as thinking about just increasing
Well, I'll start. I'm trying to sense what is changing in the role of the teacher, and what are the incentives to keep new teachers as well as experienced teachers successful, in that there's a direct relationship between their teaching and the student's success. Given that perspective, I mean, I'm not for just teacher as teacher. I'm not for solo performers. And frankly, every poll I ever read about the community's response to its teachers is always very, very favorable. The kids are doing just great. And when you're in those communities and you are a parent that a child is not succeeding, who has the guilt trip? It's the parent, not the system. Now that's what's got to change. I know too many educators who have their children in public schools, and their children have not succeeded, and they had something to do with it because they're part of the district staff or they're the reading specialist, and they claim it's the child's attitude. We have got to start realizing that much of it has to do in the training we have to really produce strong readers. And we know an awful lot now about reading. There should be absolutely no excuse for 95% of the students in California for not being very proficient readers. So I want to shift the incentives, is that we have to find a mechanism to bring about change with the majority of the teachers that are in the classroom, and that will invigorate them to want to stay and press further. Public now knows that we're not doing a very great job. And they've known that probably for a long time, but they didn't necessarily know it about their community. I think some parents and community members have never seen the performance level of their children. And when they see that in a suburban community, their average is at the 60th percentile, they think that's great. They're above the average, and certainly above the state average. But is that great relative to the norm? I mean, there's no reason that 95% of their kids shouldn't be way up there in the 70s and 80%. There's no barrier there. So obviously there's a lot to be focused on improving the profession, on the job training. And one of the incentives that we're using in our project, just as an example, is releasing teachers to be on special assignment to help coach teachers full-time. Their job is to know the instructional program, to work with teachers, shadowing, supporting, demonstrating while they're teaching, to help them identify those students who are not moving with the program as rapidly as anticipated. But it's beyond just knowing the content. It's also having a monitoring system that you know who is not performing. It isn't to be blamed. The child's not to be blamed. It's whether or not we are creative and resourceful enough to find ways as we go throughout the year to see that everyone is a winner, everyone is learning. So there's a perception problem of the community, thinking that it isn't possible that all children can learn. So we got a belief problem in this society, in this state, thinking that it's okay. It's been okay for a long, long time. Secondly, though, I agree, teachers have got to be given multiple professional roles. I suggested one, that we could have the universities integrating them more on their faculty, given that this new law does not preclude that the schools of education will keep the fifth-year program. So they still have that program. They have intern programs. We have lots of opportunities for the master teachers to be teaching these programs. And I think that, I mean, I'd hate to see that state spending asking foundations to supply the money to bring in this school-level classroom support, not district support, not a teacher that just goes out and teaches individual kids, but real professional teacher support ongoing in the classroom is a part of the instructional support system that is going to be there for all of the critical core curricular areas. And frankly, we haven't even gotten agreement how much time we should invest in the teaching of some of these core areas. See, I've learned that for teachers who are working particularly in the early grades, K-3, it's okay to spend 90% of the time just on reading. That seems odd. Well, what am I going to do the calendars and all that other stuff? That other 7 minutes you can take. But mathematics comes in. But the basic fundamental thing that we have to all agree on is what is the most critical skill that these kids have to be very proficient at. And if it takes 3-4 hours a day, it's okay. But we have to have professionals that are given that sense of importance through their training institutions, through the district participation with those institutions, and really realize that that's our job. And I want to say one other thing. The role of the teacher, I think we've got to focus on that. I think it's within our power to do this. But we have gone through a decade or two of calling the teacher the master facilitator of learning. What does that mean? We have gotten so over into student-centered learning. It's whether the kid is ready, whether the kid thinks it's an important topic. Oh, that was an interesting idea you had there, Johnny. I'm going to create tomorrow's lesson based on Johnny's great idea. We're off focus. We're not deliberate. We have no way of guaranteeing that teacher A, teacher B, teacher C, and grade 3 are all giving those kids access to the real structure of learning that they need to have in those younger grades. And I'm a secondary teacher originally. And I have gotten to the point where I am now extremely appreciative of the foundations that must come through elementary schools. So when you start targeting these things and start building programs really focused on what the teacher has to do in the classroom, what the district needs the teacher to do, we've got a long way yet to go. We don't even have I was asked by LA Times, I'm talking too much, but here we have spent probably $3 billion, maybe I'm a little wrong there, Gary, but over the last 3 years it's close, maybe $2.8 billion, class size reduction, this reading initiative. We've had we've had 11 bills about reading. It's now not only K-3, it's 4-8. We've had immense amounts of dollars in staff development. And I would claim that probably less than 10% of our school districts are really providing a systematic instructional program that they could declare after giving that program that in fact the program is failing, because they don't. We have solo performers in most of our classrooms. Teachers are doing whatever they think is best for the needs of the children in their classroom. But if they're not well trained, they have no real systematic instructional program, just guess what they're doing. I don't even know that they know how much time. They will all say, I'm spending all day reading. But who's reading? Teachers reading? The only readers in the classroom doing the reading? But what about the other majority of the kids that are not? So
let's move on to another question.
So it's a big issue.
Because I think that Alice
simple.
could go on.
Yes, I could. I could.
On. We'd love to listen to that.
No,
we'll give some other
no,
folks
I
a
appreciate
chance.
it.
We've got some people in the back
I'm
row
passionate
here.
about this, I know.
Yes.
I have a question for Dr. Curry.
Uh-oh.
Oh, you would.
You would.
I thought that she made an excellent point in arguing that schools of education need to do a better job in training teachers for what they're going to meet when they get into local schools, using internships and so on. But when you look at it from the point of view of the school of education, well, there are probably easily 100, 150 school districts within an hour-and-a-half drive to San Francisco. So what is a school district to do? That being said, do the members of the panel think that the move towards state standards and the fact of the centralization of curriculum actually makes it easier for schools of education to prepare teachers?
Yes. I agree. But I don't know that they agree. I'll leave it to the university.
Yes.
The big shift that Gary talked about is the movement towards undergraduate preparation. And we've been stuck in this fifth-year mode for many years, and it really could upset a lot of standard operating procedures. How specifically is this going to work as you see it? Maybe the dean ought to take a crack at this since it's CSU's responsibility. What's this going to look like? Doesn't it have much better chance for us to integrate content knowledge with pedagogy? And the fifth year then becomes much more of a different on-the-job training experience.
We're in the process of developing our approach to this at CSU Sacramento. And sitting in the audience is Dr. Jean Torkham, who is the director of our liberal studies program. And we have just begun conversations on how we might approach this. And at CSU, we've had a really a very positive approach to teaching freshmen, first-time freshmen, and transfer students in terms of retention, integrating curriculum that we call learning communities. And in the learning communities, courses are combined into clusters, and students are put into cohorts of approximately 30, and they take these courses together, and they're all based on a theme. So we're capitalizing on something that we have been doing for several years that has been very positive for students, and applying that to this new integrated 4- and 5-year teacher preparation program. So we are going to be developing learning communities with a teacher preparation theme, which will combine early field experience, content area instruction, and methodology taught concurrently with the faculty working together to capitalize and learn from each other and to focus on what the students need to know. We are going to be using what we are calling our distinguished teachers in residence, who are K-12 teachers who are serving on our faculty currently, to be part of that planning process. So that's just a flavor of the direction that we're going at Sac State. Each campus is going to be approaching this at their local level in their own way. So there'll probably be a variety of models out there within the next year or two.
I'd like to comment on that, if I may. I just hope that we don't have a lot of experimentation. There are a lot of states that have the same idea of undergraduate preparation. To what extent, if we had that word flexibility in the university and in their planning, one of the designs that I have found very effective, and I know some other states, is that they will allow the undergraduate to actually practice teach in the senior year. And their 5th year is focused on content. And so while they still have 5 years, the whole focus is on what they're able to do, their willingness to practice teach in a younger age, and then be exempt from having to take a lot more pedagogy courses, and in fact can use their 5th year program in more academic master's degree level programs and either receive a master's teaching degree or a master's in that content area with the credential. So I just think it's important that we don't play around with this too long, because there are models and we have got to get the best and the brightest. And I think it's more than just looking at the CSU. I think we're looking at the UCs, the private schools, because there are ways to attract and really enhance the caliber of teacher by assuring them that they have flexibility to do what I know at least middle school and high school teachers are going to say is, I've got to really be good at my content to survive in California's classrooms today.
We have some more questions in the back over here. You right here in this striped shirt.
I see one of the issues that hasn't been discussed yet, it's very focal, is more the issue of teacher retention than getting qualified teachers into the profession. The first 5 years, we're losing so many teachers. Certainly the VITSA program is hopefully a positive step in the right direction in setting up this mentor relationship and retaining some teachers. But what other programs can we set up to make sure that, for example, our new teacher in the elementary schools, she doesn't get one of the K through 3 20-to-1 ratio classes. She gets the 5th grade, and she's got 36. What can we do to support those starting out teachers to get them through those first 5 years to then when they use this program?
I'll just throw out a couple of somewhat revolutionary ideas. One is to give the beginning teacher not the most difficult assignments.
Yes.
If school districts and teacher unions were serious about this issue, we would be giving some of the most attractive teaching situations to our beginning teachers, rather than having them do the combined grades and have to teach the children that present the most problems in class. Another thing that we might do is to have a reduced teaching workload for beginning teachers, 3/4 workload, and do some of the things that Alice was suggesting in her opening comments of the university linking with first-year teachers to try and act as a bridge. After there has been some of the teacher training, people go out and attempt some of these things, and there's some successes, but there are also many frustrations and failures to try and regroup. And if you had a reduced workday, you would be able to do some of those things. But that again gets I think, to a central issue is how much do we really value teaching, and are we willing to redesign the resources and the culture of schools? And that's something that all of us bear some responsibility for.
Yes, back here.
What does the issue of voucher allocation play in this mix?
Go for it, finance.
Oh, I could say something about this, but it might be not popular. Well, if you think that part of the problem with having programs that are actually attractive to keeping new teachers in teaching, i.e. something that has to revamp the whole teacher union school board relationship, you might think that something like vouchers might actually be a positive impetus to actually being something that could shake up what we're doing in public education. On the other side, if you think that it's basically just going to cream skim money away from the existing schools and have people who are wealthy who are going to be having their kids in private schools anyway, so it's not going to have any effect on the programs, you might think that there's going to be no effect. But it might be that it could be that vouchers will, in some sense, or magnet schools or charter schools, could actually be a way of shaking up some of the existing structures that are in place and actually find a way to make it more attractive to individual teachers to stay rather than have the bureaucracy in place as it is.
I think that you have to be careful about the issue that Alice raised in terms of community and the community that cares about the schools. When you talk about vouchers, you do end up segregating communities and segregating the communities that care about a specific issue. And I think that that end result could only be negative for public schools and for the quality of teachers in those schools that are not voucher schools.
Do we have time for one more?
Right here.
One issue that was raised several times earlier is the need for collaboration between different groups involved in producing policy. Beyond existing programs, can you suggest ways to encourage these collaborative efforts?
I think that there's, I'll take it. We have had some incentives have been provided to institutions of higher education, for example, to collaborate. There's been some money set aside that allow us to do some planning. There's been some money allocated to school districts to collaborate with institutions of higher education in teacher preparation initiatives. For example, in the efforts that are underway with CSUS, we're partnering with Sac City and also partnering with San Juan. And both of those districts applied to the Commission on Teacher Credentialing and received X number of dollars for each intern, which they shared with us. They got the most, of course. We got a little bit. So that's an incentive. What we overcame initially was just that the whole reaching out to work together. I think there were fears on both sides and apprehension on both sides from the universities as well as K-12. The universities saying, oh my God, what's going to happen to our program, you know, if someone else starts monkeying around with it and doing things differently. And K-12 was looking at us going, oh, like what do they know? You know, they've been in the ivory tower for too long. And it's taken some trust building on both sides. And what we've discovered is that the faculties who are participating in these partnerships, the faculties from K-12 along with the faculties from the universities, are discovering that what they are doing is they're actually strengthening our program. And the candidates that are coming through those programs have, they're getting much more attention. They are getting much more mentoring. They're coming out with theory, practice, and district-based perspectives on all the curricular areas. So we're feeling very optimistic. We're doing research on these initiatives so that we can show some data, not just anecdotal data, but follow-up data as to how successful these teachers will be down the road. but we're feeling very optimistic that these, in fact, are going to be stronger teachers than some of the teachers that have come through our traditional fifth-year programs. So,
But it does reinforce external initiatives do have an impact internally.
Definitely.
And the question is, how long do you need that support to make it institutionalized, part of the system? And I think it's going to be a while. And so we do need some sustaining efforts that the legislature and the governor's office give to the local communities to help support model programs that really are being designed and initiated. Really, the whole creative effort is there in those grants to do this. So I think they will serve the communities well. But there does need to be an impetus, and I do think it comes first from the outside, and then the inside plays.
any other of my panelists like to make a closing remark before we adjourn this evening?
At the risk of overdoing it, let me just try to follow up on your question. Another approach that if we're genuinely serious about collaboration and linking it to the standards issue, we have a system now where teachers, in terms of moving on the salary schedule, have tremendous freedom to take whatever course they want for professional development, and it does not have to in any way be linked to either what the state standards are or what the district priorities are. If we were really focused in a systematic way in terms of student outcomes, where we're spending over $1 billion for teachers to engage in this credit taking for whatever purposes they want, I think we would stop that process and we would say, if you want extra money for compensation, and this is consistent with Alan Auden's, some of his thinking, and said, you know, here are the two priority areas, reading and math instruction, or might be somewhat different at the secondary level, but if you want extra compensation, you need to engage in a professional development program that is aligned with what the district and the state priorities are. And if we had that in place, then I think universities and county offices and school districts could collaborate to develop a package or a program that would be appropriate. But right now we have such a free choice system. It's not systematic in any way. It's not collaborative in any meaningful sense. So if we really get these standards in place and we get serious about it, I think there would be ways to sweetening the pot through having more money for salaries, but saying that it has to be linked to a particular thing. And I think if you do that, then maybe we can generate more public support, because the public is kind of skeptical. It's just as business as usual, and let's give people more money. But if you were to change the dynamics a little bit of this process, I think you could have both collaboration, greater public support, and focusing on the issues that everyone said we're most concerned about, which is improving student achievement.
Actually, I would, if I may, just drop in just for a moment. It is being done, and I do think we need to reward districts that internally, their boards and their leadership, connecting with what the state has done for them, provided them the standards, an assessment program, and all of the staff development money. The district that I would say is a good example of exactly what Gary has mentioned is Elk Grove. Teachers can automatically move up a whole step, which is about 5% raise, given that they agree over a 5-year period to take 150 hours of staff development in the areas that are prescribed by the district. And of course, you know what areas they are for most levels: mathematics and reading, language arts. And if they do not meet their obligation for those 150 hours, then they are immediately returned to the level that they should be at based on their original entry. So it is an agreement, and it is very professional, and they are going to be very successful in this because it was driven by what the district and its board felt was necessary.
I'd like to thank you all for being here this afternoon, and special thanks to the panelists.